As we entered the open section, we soon found ourselves walking along very distinctive paths which communicated with one another just as our streets today. As we approached what appeared to be a dead end, we found it turned to the right and continued along until it met another street. There was distinct order here. These were clearly once streets, and along these streets were the shapes of buildings. Even to our untrained eye, the evidence was undeniable. The ziggurat shape near the entrance was almost perfectly preserved. Our research had yielded the fascinating fact that substances burned with sulfur or brimstone had a remaining ash that was heavier than the initial unburned substance. That explained our question as to why the ash of these cities had been able to remain all these 3,900 years. The layering present in all the formations was another positive evidence that whatever these once were, they had been burned at temperatures exceeding 4,000 or 5,000 degrees. This layering effect was the result of thermal ionization. Whenever a substance is burned at extremely high temperatures, the ions of the various substances being burned attract and repel, distorting the flame. Ron drew our attention to features present here which simply do not occur naturally. He showed us a section which revealed a broken double wall which extended toward us at a perfect 90-degree angle. Over the many years, the ash of these cities had eroded to such a degree that it caused the thick layer of loose ash, which made walking so difficult. This, combined with the heat that was well over 100 degrees and the intense glare of the sun off of the whitish remains, hampered our exploration somewhat. The cities were so large, we knew it would take weeks to complete our exploration of even this one, so we decided to move on to a different area.
Right. Goodness.
You know, I was just under the impression that it was just leveled when the fire came down, but I guess like with what happened to Lot's wife, she turned around, she was turned into a pillar, that these were preserved.
Right.
Is that true, or?
This appears to be the situation, Brian. In 2 Peter, the 2nd chapter, in the 6th verse, it says that these are an example. And in the Greek terms there say that it's a visible example of what God will do to the wicked in the future. So these people suffered the vengeance of eternal fire. This is in Jude. And under normal circumstances, we could not expect structures that are recognizable today as buildings and temples and this sort of thing. But God has preserved them so that it becomes obvious to those that are willing to see.
Okay. You need to tell us how he destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. It really was by fire, but she said thermal ionization. Thermal ionization, that's like nuclear.
It has to do with tremendous heat. And of course, the modern method of producing this kind of heat is thermonuclear devices. But anyway, what we have found, and your audience can see in just a moment, Susan, is that there are millions of spheres of sulfur that are scattered all through these ashes, much like pepper in gravy or something. It's just in there like a rain would fall. I think you might
grab one of those. Can you pick that up?
Bring the plate over, I think. We put these on a wonderful china dish here.
All right.
Seems kind of strange.
These came in varying sized spheres of sulfur. The fact that they assume a spherical shape shows that they came through the atmosphere. Now, volcanoes produce some sulfur, but this is laid out in a strata, never exceeds 30% purity. This stuff is 96% pure sulfur. The other ingredients are metals, which cause it to burn much hotter than just plain sulfur would burn. Each of these spheres are encapsulated with burnt sulfur, showing that all of them were on fire. This could have been accomplished by the friction, heat of the friction as they entered and came through the atmosphere.
What would happen if we set a match to that?
If you set a match to this, this would burn and chase everybody out of here, because burning sulfur is unparalleled for schmelliness. Also, it would disintegrate this plate, and we'd have a China syndrome right here on stage, because it would burn its way through everything that you see here.
Now, is there much of this there in those sites?
Oh.
Millions and
It's
millions
everywhere.
of them.
All right. Why don't we see some of that? We've got some footage that shows how God actually rained brimstone, which is what sulfur is. Is that right?
That's what Webster's dictionaries and the encyclopedia, when you look up brimstone, it says burning stone or sulfur.
Okay.
Burning stone. Coming your way.
Is sulfur. That is in most of them. Now the ones that do not have sulfur in them, and this one we just took a bunch of sulfur out and put it in our specimen bag. But the ones that don't have sulfur have a very black center where they have, where it's been very hot. So now we'll move in on this one where there is some sulfur still present, and back off just enough so you can see what we're up to here, and we'll go collect that sample in a bag.
Before I started using this knife, it was very, very sharp. Okay, here this is, and we have collected some more, and it smells and tastes like sulfur. Now the Bible tells us that it rained fire and brimstone upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now what you see in front of you here is the results of large and small, well, varying sized chunks of sulfur, burning sulfur that have hit. And what we find here is that God rained this burning sulfur down upon this city, and rain is a perfect description of it. It landed just in the pattern that rain would fall, and the stuff, of course, the accumulative heat of all of this upon the city set the entire thing ablaze. The flash point of every material there, metal, stone, of course the people, and everything burned, and this sulfur continued to burn, and it vitrified the material around it after it had burned it all up.
Goodness. Now, how much of this did you find around the area? This is just a small piece of that tape, but how much did you find?
We found at each of these 5 locations just unlimited quantities of these spheres. They're at all depths. These things would penetrate anything that they hit. They would penetrate stone, wood, even metal. And we have found vitrified gold out there that has been vitrified and
like vaporized.
Vaporized, exactly. We have found the crystals that gold, when it is vaporized, turns into these salts. And we, of course, found those with our electronic systems. And so we also found parts of human skeletons that were all burnt and gnarled. There is no doubt at all that these are the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah, and that they were burnt with tremendous heat.
This happened like 3,000, 4,000 years ago. It wasn't something of that.
That's right. It was about the same distance before Christ, back in the BC area, as we are on the after Christ AD period.
Why do you think other people had not noticed this, and do people recognize your find as legitimate?
Well, there are, you can tell them about.
Okay, well, when Ron first, I was at home when he first went over there and made kind of the announcement, kind of verbalized it. He called me up and he says, well, I think I found Sodom and Gomorrah. And my reaction was, sure.
Yeah, right.
And he says, I've been driving past these sites 40 or 50 times because he has to go past them to go to another site he's working on. But the thing was, is that he says, I don't know how I could convince anybody else of them, because right now all they are is just shapes. And so he came home, and Greg Brewer, what we didn't show on there was a film of a guy, Greg Brewer, that went with us one time. He could just reach in there and grab this ash and go like this, and it would just disintegrate like talcum powder. It is ash. So anyhow, he made arrangements to go back in October of 90. Took Richard Reeves with him, and we were praying for some sort of evidence that would prove that this was Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, the situation is that a tremendous amount of erosion has taken place, and the sulfur capsules have been broken away, and the sulfur balls are laying all around the ground, and they're covered in ash, so they just look like lumps. In 1990, when he went, it had just rained, and that is very unusual. They get less than 1/4 inch of rain a year. The rain had caused that big chunk that y'all saw laying on the ground to fall. And inside this freshly fallen material, him and Richard came upon it, and there were all these reddish rings with all the sulfur balls. Then they began to look around and note, then they knew what to look for.
Now, if this is just ash and can crumble in your hand like talcum powder, then why has not that rain or even the slightest amount of wind or anything just totally obliterated all of this?
When I was studying all of this, I'm kind of devil's advocate with Ron. When he tells me something, I have to study it out. And so I began studying combustion. And the man, a Frenchman by the name of Lavoisier, I think that's his name, he began studying combustion. And he noticed that substances that were burned with sulfur had a remaining ash that was heavier than the substance was before it was burned. And that's because the chemical reaction draws in extra molecules from the oxygen. So God arranged to burn this with a substance that would leave a heavier ash than the original materials that were burned, which makes it tremendously heavy, and it is crusty on the outside. Not all of it you can just reach right in there and grab it. On the outside, the weathering has caused it to become kind of crusty, but once you get past that, it's compacted.
Is it like petrification, or just more dense, or?
It's very dense ash, very, very dense. It burns so quickly. When you burn a piece of wood, it just kind of, the ash kind of spreads out. This was burned so fast, it was burned in place before it had time to expand. And that's why everything, right.
Just instantaneously.
How long do you think it took for him to, if he rained this down, how long did it take? Was this over days?
Well, the Bible says that as in an instant.
Yeah.
So it was very quickly done. And with all of this sulfur that we see out there, I mean, this had to be an inferno. It would not have taken very long.
Almost like the striking of a match when that
Yeah.
first
That's right.
flash.
Yes.
And the evidence, the fact that all of these, especially when you see these sulfur balls come out of the capsules, they're round. And it says that it rained fire and brimstone from heaven. And anything that comes through the atmosphere ends up rounded because of going through the air. And these are round.